Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when you're watching this. My name's Connor from 905 Review, and today we're going to be talking about My War, the second album from the LA-based punk band Black Flag. Now, this comes following a long 3-year gap from their debut Damaged, as their label SST was in a big legal feud with Unicorn Records. Now, for some context, SST was formed by Black Flag's guitarist Greg Ginn when he was 12 years old as a means to sell modified World War II equipment. Because, I mean, what other kind of backstory would you have to be in one of the most famous hardcore punk bands? When Ginn formed his first band, Panic, which would eventually become Black Flag, he had trouble finding a label to distribute his music through. And so, with some business already under his belt with SST, he then decided to transform it into a record label. So eventually, once the group is ready to release their first album, Damaged, they ask for help from MCA Records. And MCA gives this task to one of their smaller affiliates they run called Unicorn Records. Now, everything was fine and dandy with Damaged ready to be released when at the very last minute MCA stepped in and halted the production as they refused some of the really strong subject matter on the album. So SST sues Unicorn Records, saying they didn't pay all the expenses they were supposed to in the production. Unicorn then countersues SST and has an injunction, thereby preventing Black Flag from releasing any new material. Then SST, being like, screw these guys, releases the compilation Everything Went Black from before Henry Rollins had become the singer of the band. And you can guess how that turned out. Unicorn, of course, sued SST. And yes, Unicorn would win this suit, but in the end, the good guys still won, because within a year, Unicorn Records had gone bankrupt, and Black Flag was releasing albums again, which brings us to where we are now. So as a result of all that turmoil, the band didn't actually have a bass guitarist at the time that they were recording this album, so it's actually Greg Ginn you hear playing both the lead guitar and the bass guitar in this. And that is what would become the group's second studio album, which also features one of the best covers you'll ever see. So with all that history out of the way, let's get into the track listing, starting off with the title song, My War, which serves as a great introduction for the raw intensity we're about to get into. A song about betrayal and lack of trust. You can really hear the passion of the shock and or frustration with every line that Henry Rollins delivers on this song. He sounds like he's gonna break down into a fit of insanity. His raw passion and aggression and energy are very apparent on this in a fantastic performance, as we're going to hear plenty more of throughout the rest of the album. Veterans of the game, Grand Theft Auto 5 might recognize this song. It was on the hardcore punk fictional radio station Channel X, which was actually hosted by Henry Rollins in the game. And this song is such a powerful one and such a favorite of the band's that while recording the album, they wanted to make sure they got it absolutely perfectly, as great as they could. So one of the recording days was actually just trying to get this song down for 4 hours straight. And I think they did a damn good job at it. Next up, we have the track Can't Decide, a song about having various mixed thoughts and feelings that you ultimately end up keeping to yourself just because the paranoia, I suppose, of how people might perceive you for having these thoughts, believing that some people won't be able to understand what you're going through. And so in some senses, you could say it's a relatable song. As the guitar fiddles around in the intro to the song, we're introduced to the driving bass line that would serve as the main rhythm for the song. And it's a fantastic one at that. guitar has a nice raunchy sound to it that I love. The drum fills just before the chorus are such a small touch, but they add a significant amount, I would say. Another fantastic vocal performance from Henry Rollins. There's not much to hate on this track.
I conceal my feelings, so I won't have to explain what I can't explain. Anyway, I can't decide.
Next up, we have Beat My Head Against the Wall. It's probably the most fun song on the album. It's as upbeat as the others, just almost not as angry.
My head against the wall.
Oh, might have hit my head one too many times, to be honest. We then have the frantic I Love You, a song about being madly in love with someone. Madly in love as in murdering them, so you don't have to be paranoid about them cheating on you. Kind of love.
I put my fist to the door. I hate myself for you. I love you.
Following this up with another frantic track, we are now at Forever Time. Forever Time. I'm really beating the shit out of my hands on this here. So I'm gonna go ahead and somewhat spoil the album review, but I absolutely love this album. There's so many strong songs on it. It's so hard to pick one to be a favorite, but this is definitely a contender, I can tell you that.
I feel like some kind of death machine with skin and muscles and a heart that pumps my blood. Time.
Much like the rest of this album, this song is just so hardcore. I'd be surprised if there was ever anyone at a Black Flag concert that didn't mosh to this. It's definitely fighting music. I mean, this is something I'd come into the octagon to, 100%. Closing off the first side of the album, we have Swinging Man. Now, this song is such a disaster. It's all over the place. The guitar sounds super zany. The drums are so sporadic. They sound so much faster than everything else, like it was supposed to be for a different song. And Henry Rollins is just rambling while screaming. It's a train wreck.
Hang around, I'm the swinging man, and my feet never touch the ground.
So, for as big of a mess as this song is, I don't mind it too terribly, I'll be honest. And after studying this album for this review and finding out the backstory to this song, that only made me like it more, to be honest. I'll play the clip. It's from a podcast that Henry Rollins has with Heidi May, and he explains how the song was inspired by an acid trip, and it's actually kind of terrifying, to be honest.
One of my fellow neuronauts, as Tim Leary called people on acid, said, "Hey, Henry, are you okay over there?" I'm like, "Yeah." "What?" He said, "Well, you're just rocking back and forth. We just want to make sure that you're cool." And I said, "I'm not dead?" And they went, "Oh, no," because these two guys were very, very experienced. I went, No, you're not dead. Everything's cool. Everything's cool. I went, "Oh, good." Because I thought I was hanging by my neck in the corner, and the sound of the shoes was the sound of me swinging back and forth.
See, that's not fun.
But that became the song Swinging Man.
So that concludes the first side of the album, and Nothing Left Inside would be the track that starts off the second. Now, I didn't want to say anything until we got to this point, so as to not spoil it, but the two sides of this album are completely different genres, which is part of the reason I like it so much, and part of the reason why it's such a notorious album. Now, the first side being the 6 songs we just went through, they're all very angsty, pretty fast paced, all of them 2.5 to 3.5 minutes long, aside for Can't Decide at 5.5 minutes. Whereas the second side of this, it's only 3 songs, but all of them are over 6 minutes long. And, well, let's just check out how different they sound. So as you can tell, these songs are practically sludge metal long before the genre would be considered to have been invented. These songs often and accurately draw comparison to some of Black Sabbath's stuff, the long, drawn-out, slow, heavy songs that they had. I love the drums on this. The guitar that comes in is so devastating. Henry's wailing is as good as ever. I constantly find myself singing this. It gets stuck in my head all the time. And that's one of the things is a lot of the songs from the second side of the album, I find they've stuck with me more than the first side, surprisingly. This brings us to the track 3 Nights, starting off with a constant pounding drum, as well as a moody bass line, before we're joined by 2 dismal, raunchy sounding guitars.
Let me go. Let me go. Surely breaking up.
So as heard here, as well as on the previous track, the slowed down tempo still don't stop Henry Rollins from bringing his intensity and his, yelling. It's also got some monologue that is now classic him, as can be heard on songs from albums such as Family Man, also by Black Flag. And finally, we end off with Scream. It starts pretty similarly to 3 Nights, with a constant drum as well as a bass line that are eventually followed in by a guitar. However, it features much more screaming from Henry in what feels like anguish.
I get fed up.
And that wraps up all the tracks from My War. So there's been plenty of reissues of this, so it shouldn't be too hard to get your hands on. Unbeknownst to me, until studying this album, there are supposedly 2 vinyl variants to be aware of. Apparently it was pressed on a red translucent vinyl in 1990, which to me sounds like that would be pretty ahead of its time. Mind you, I don't know too much the history of vinyl pressings, but I figured maybe. I don't know. I thought it was more of a 2000s thing, but I could be wrong. And there's also a limited edition blue pressing. However, the year of it's not specified anywhere on the release, though on the site Discogs, they do believe it to have been from some point in the early 2000s. So those 2 might be a bit trickier to get, but I got nothing. I don't know. So upon the release of My War in 1984, fans of the band were understandably mixed on it, with the second side being so vastly different from anything the band had put out prior to that. I was a little surprised, but I guess not at the same time, that critics were very negative about it as well when it came out. I would understand why they would, just because, as I said, it was pretty different from their hardcore punk sound, but at the same time, it's not like those 3 songs are bad, at least not to me anyways. So that caught me off guard. This album would eventually become very influential towards the post-hardcore as well as the grunge genres. The albums from the second side, they are fairly grungy with how heavy and kind of slow they are, right? But also aside from that, apparently Black Flag touring to promote My War, in fact, was the first concert that Kurt Cobain ever went to, and he also cited the album as being one of his favorites. So there's a direct relation there anyway. Now, it was a little challenging to find what the current consensus on the album is. I wasn't really able to come across many recent reviews of it, but I guess that's what people like me are here for, right? Hell, this is honestly my favorite punk album. And only half of it's even punk. Like I said before, I think that's one of the things that makes me love the album so much. It shows how versatile Black Flag is. Henry Rollins consistently has dynamic performances throughout this thing. Even on songs he didn't even write the lyrics to, he still does a fantastic delivery on them. It could be because I'm pretty big on grunge and sludge metal and stoner rock / stoner metal, but I actually think I prefer the second side to the first side of this. The 3 songs on there are all absolutely killer. So with that being said, we're gonna have to stamp this thing with an A grading. No one could ever convince me it deserves anything lower. This is, I don't know if I'd put it in my top 5 albums all time, but I can guarantee it's in my top 10 all time. I absolutely love this thing. The band gives everything they've got on this thing, and it's just incredible. I strongly recommend giving this a full listen through to anybody who likes music that's even remotely heavy. So that concludes our recap and review of My War. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Stay safe out there and take it easy. But real quick before we go, I gotta ask you, did I rate it too high or did I rate it too low? Let me know your thoughts on My War down below, and we'll see you next time.